A lot of people assume that this was potential proof that Kinger has admin commands for the circus, which I do think is possible. However, I instead raise the idea that every character has this type of make-it-up imagination ability.
We all technically have the ability to conjure, just like Kane. It just comes naturally to him.
Meaning, there is a good possibility that the circus itself, whatever it actually is, was possibly programmed during those years and could have been running all this time. God ended up favoring Abel's sacrifice more than Cain's, which led to an amount of jealousy from Cain that culminated in Cain murdering his own brother Abel.
I'm sorry I did this to you, buddy.
So let's ask ourselves the extremely important question: how exactly do the headsets work that transport people to the circus? Way actually has me referencing another unbelievably heartbreaking and depressing psychological horror game by the name of Soma. This would imply that when somebody puts on the headset, it just discreetly scans their brain, and other than that, it doesn't affect the person at all. Simply, you put on the headset, take it off, and a digital clone that thinks it's you wakes up in the digital circus.
Brain scans.
Hello everyone, and today we're back talking about the digital circus once again, and, well, I was right. There isn't too much to say in regards to my source theory, as I was right about a simple majority of things, a lot of which being key points in regards to the circus. That being said, I wasn't totally right. There's a fair portion of things I got wrong, and there's even a few claims that I made that were left largely unable to be proved or disproved in the finale. And overall, there's a lot of questions that still linger about this digital circus that I may or may not make one final theory about, but let's start with the recap since my theory before episode 7. Spoilers, obviously, so if you haven't seen episode 8 or 9, go ahead and pause right now. Episode 8 was essentially the breaking point that Kane reached that I predicted would eventually come, and it confirmed that Kinger, without a shadow of a doubt, worked at Kane and Abel, as well as confirming my claim that any character could create and manipulate objects. It additionally displayed in the start of the episode that Kane absorbed another AI when he created the circus. Kane, during this episode, becomes much ruder, crueler, and aggressive, which leads the human crew into trying to find a way to calm him down, or just temporarily shut him down or put him to sleep. Since Kinger is a programmer and he knows how to, in the show's words, conjure, the term for creating and manipulating objects, he has Pomni go find a computer, which she finds by conjuring an exit door, being the same one she found in the first episode, which she gives to Kinger, who then orders her to distract Kane while he works. In their attempts to distract Kane, they escalate him from being cooler to outright going ballistic violently and sadistically torturing all of them, causing Kinger in his haste to accidentally commit deicide and delete Kane altogether, rather than just putting him to sleep or shutting him down. Given that Crane created the entire circus, this causes a great deal of damage to the entire map, forming holes in the world and casting a gray hue over everything. Moving on to episode 9, the series finale. Jax is immediately mad at Kinger for accidentally making that blunder, and Kinger in his programming makes a disturbing discovery that while searching through Kane's files, he came across a series of brain scans, something that Scratch, another programmer and seemingly the project lead, was working on, and that Kane somehow managed to get them working, meaning that all 6 of the human characters, as well as anybody who had ever entered the circus previously, were effectively copied brain scans put into a virtual body. This meant that effectively nobody was ever leaving the circus, as they were just brain scans in virtual bodies. This is understandably heartbreaking for the entire crew, even though a fair amount of them already suspected something like this, and everyone splits up to go grieve in their own way. Kinger, however, gets to work immediately, starting to try and patch holes in the circus's floors by conjuring shapes to plug them. Pomni goes over and starts to help Kinger, and slowly the rest of the cast joins in too, except Jax, who eventually abstracts off screen after deciding against reaching out to Pomni for the last time. This is a catastrophic situation, as they don't exactly have access to the abstraction cellar, meaning there's a good chance that the abstraction monster can now essentially roam around and rampage uncontested. However, Pomni, without consulting anybody else or even elaborating on her idea, has a plan which I can only assume she got when she heard Kinger's story about his wife's abstraction, corners the abstraction monster in the personal room hallway, and shoots out all of the lights, calming the monster down before embracing it, transforming Pomni into what I can only assume is Jax's current character sprite mind file. There, she is able to watch Jax's memories through Jax's eyes, and we learn about Ribbit and Kaufmo and their relationship with Jax, and how that relationship, due to Jax being extremely closed off about facing emotional problems and masking to the point of alienating others, eventually caused Ribbit, and very likely also Kaufmo, to abstract. However, all these memories and disgruntled personality files aside, Pomni is able to seemingly locate the actually intact Jax, where they're able to have one final conversation and goodbye with each other, meaning that there is a very possible chance that the intact minds of abstracted persons do in fact stay inside abstraction monsters. However, in this tearful goodbye, the darkness calmed the abstraction monster down enough to where Zubul is able to lasso Pomni away from it, and they eventually come to the idea of creating a tent for the abstraction monster to go into, as it will be perpetually dark and thus keep it perpetually docile. In the time of the characters doing more repairs, Kane actually returned somehow, whether the system automatically restored him as some kind of maintenance cycle, detecting his file in a recycling bin and restoring it as a sort of system auto-maintenance, or some random reason that also fills this plot hole. And in that time, for some reason, Kane suddenly becomes much more reasonable, and even removes the blue artificial intelligence that he once absorbed, apologizing and lowering his power a fair bit, but also likely rendering him less insane. He then apologizes to all of the crew for how he behaved once he returns to the circus, and even concedes rule to the crew, letting them run this place as equals, and even displays to them a gift in the form of a slideshow of a series of social media posts made by the characters' human counterparts, who are still living their lives and are all doing either significantly better or just as good when they first entered the circus. This is due to, for some reason, Kane being able to briefly connect to the internet and search up the names of each of the brain-scanned humans. This obviously greatly raises the morale of all the characters, and then we see a compilation of the crew rebuilding the circus alongside Kane, who is now included not as the ringleader, but as one of them, and how they slowly begin to become more and more friendly towards him, and overall all of them finding contentment in their new lives in the circus. But just before the series ends, it shows both Pomni waving to seemingly us, or the audience. Then it shows all 6 of the characters' human counterparts standing together waiting at a bus stop, none of them knowing each other, and hopping on like nothing happened. Overall, it's a bittersweet ending to the series. That all being said though, let's go over all my claims and talk about things I got right and wrong. So, first and foremost, let's talk about the biggest claim I made, what some people have come to refer to as Soma Theory, which is fitting considering even I referenced that game when I made my claim on it. The theory that the characters were instead just copies of people's scanned brains, culminating in a virtual character that behaved like a human, and, well, I got it right. I set up my claim for brain scans as one of 4 possibilities for how the headsets worked, and set it as one of the 2 far more likely possibilities, and even valuing that as most likely of those 2. And as it turns out, I was completely right. As a matter of fact, not only was I right about it, but the way I detailed it, I would say I practically got it dead on. This would imply that when somebody puts on the headset, it just discreetly scans their brain, and other than that, it doesn't affect the person at all. Simply, you put on the headset, take it off, and a digital clone that thinks it's you wakes up in the digital circus. This could also work depending on Kane's definition of murder, because even though he didn't terminate anyone directly, he still knows that each of the people in the circus are doomed.
Brain scans. Scratch was trying to make a brain scanner. I didn't think it actually worked. We didn't know how to work with the files, and they were impossibly small, given what they were supposed to be. I saw a folder full of them when I was in Kane's code. So, I guess Kane found a way to get them working.
Since I made this theory, as stated in my episode 7 follow-up, I've come to learn that I was not the first person to come up with this theory, but I was the first to make a full-on video on it and including it into it, I think. That being said, I valued the mystery on how the headsets work as the most important thing to know about the entire digital circus, and it's a very good feeling to know that I got that part right overall in the end. Moving on to my second claim that Cain had potentially murdered someone, and this was actually the second of the 4 possibilities that I was running for the headset, being there was a possibility that on top of Cain scanning the brains of a person, but that this scan was also killing them, functioning like a rip scan from RimWorld. Coming from the idea that Cain was a name reference from the biblical story Cain and Abel, and it turns out that I was sort of half right, half wrong about this. As it turns out, it was revealed in episode 8 that Cain absorbed and consumed another AI, and used it in order to build the circus, being very topical to that of the exact Bible story. Cain, being a farmer, offers food from his harvests, and Abel, being a shepherd, offers his firstborn lamb. God ended up favoring Abel's sacrifice more than Cain's, which led to an amount of jealousy from Cain that culminated in Cain murdering his own brother Abel. Cain then fled after God's punishment on him and built the first city of Enoch. But I was wrong in the sense that it had anything to do with the headsets, or that it even killed anyone, unless you consider my claim that it could technically be considered murder, as the characters entering the circus were doomed from the start, as they were never alive to begin with, something I did reference in my theory. Overall, I think this claim has merit, but it's just not enough for me to claim that I was right about it in the same way the brain scan one was, so I'm just calling this one a half and half. Now, let's move on to something I more or less got wrong, being that of the claim that there were rogue NPCs or members of the circus spying on the crew. Additionally, we know that there are other NPCs outside of his approved list roaming around, like this one hiding in the back corner watching the cast at both the beginning and the end of episode 5. Pay attention to this detail, cause it'll be important later. Amazing Digital Circus, we clearly have NPCs who are independent of Cain, and it could be a very likely possibility that they are planning against him as well. Whether they are employees or other Apex level AIs like Cain is yet to be determined. This turned out to be nothing but almost entirely a red herring in episode 7, with the person hiding in the background being another completely obedient NPC to Cain, and it being all part of an adventure. That being said, there is some validity to this claim in regards to a rogue NPC aggressor against Cain, rather the scene where Bubble is intentionally antagonizing Cain to send him over the edge, which would eventually lead to Cain being defeated by the crew, indirectly dooming him with Bubble's actions. And when Cain returns in the finale after getting rid of the blue AI he absorbed, we don't ever see Bubble anymore either, thus this whole time Bubble very well could have been the blue AI trying to attack Cain from within. Overall, there is some truth to the claim, but I'm not willing to claim any type of victory over it, and this was a decent-sized contention. I'm just gonna go ahead and say I got wrong. Another thing that I got right, though, but in all honesty this was kind of obvious, was that not everybody was going to survive the end of the series, and that it almost needed a sort of sacrificial lamb. I'm not gonna lie, I don't think there's gonna be a good ending here with everything we've seen. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, Soma, the Digital Circus. It looks like it's not going to end well. But maybe there's a chance for some people, if not to escape, but to at least save everyone. But it's probably going to require a sacrifice.
There's no coming back from this.
Then talk to me now.
I don't want to go.
And that lamb ended up being Jax. I was wrong in the sense that it would help shut down the circus or fix things, but rather it just ended up being more or less collateral damage from the fight with Cain. They didn't turn off the circus per se, or even get out, but all of them were able to find eventual contentment and happiness in the circus. It's just a sad shame that Jax was unable to survive long enough to see it. And a rather cruel irony, Jax previously seemed to be one of the people most susceptible to even staying in the circus, but in the end, he was the only one of the actual cast post-Pomni to not survive. I'm gonna say my accuracy on this was in my favor, but my narrative as to why was off. Now, as for a handful of lesser things I got right, I was right about all the characters having the ability to create or conjure in the circus. A lot of people assume that this was potential proof that Kinger has admin commands for the circus, which I do think is possible. However, I instead raised the idea that every character has this type of make-it-up imagination ability.
We all technically have the ability to conjure, just like Cain. It just comes naturally to him.
I was right about Cain imminently approaching a rampage state as he did so in episode 8. Cain also seemed like he's starting to mentally break himself in some capacity, with him showing less and less effort on the adventures, and seeming like he's more and more quickly approaching a crash out. Do I think Cain will eventually turn against the humans and start intentionally torturing them? I do think that's possible, and it might already be being enacted. Cain could just be intentionally deceiving them, so these characters are likely also on a timer for whatever they need to do. I was correct about the origin of the circus starting at around the late 90s, as referenced by the backdrop looking like computers from the late 90s. Meaning there is a good possibility that the circus itself, whatever it actually is, was possibly programmed during those years and could have been running all this time. I was right about Kinger working for Cain and Abel, but most people were right about this too, so I'm not exactly special here. We also have my abandoned buildings claim, where at least half the characters were exploring decrepit abandoned buildings, including Pomni and Zubul, as part of urban exploration, and Ragatha, who was a realtor. This is one of several claims I made that we are yet able to be actually proved, due to lack of confirmation in the finale, but since we know that Jax was homeless, and thus likely occasionally slept in abandoned buildings, and Kinger gets a pass as he worked originally at the company, we only have Gangle left, who doesn't appear to have a direct correlation to abandoned buildings. Thus, with 5 out of the 6 characters all having a direct relation to it, I'm claiming that this is probably true. This isn't completely confirmed, as well as what the state of the company of CNA is, but let's move on to all the other claims I made but largely can't prove in one way or another. The first claim being the one that I idiotically named the theory on, for lack of a better name, being that the circus, or at least what Cain designed, was either built in or loosely based off of the Source engine from Half-Life and made by Valve. Which, towards the end, does unironically seem like an actual possibility now, as the entire circus now just feels like a glorified Gmod server, but ultimately, not only do I have no way of proving that this is true post-finale, I also don't really see it as all that important anymore anyways. We also have my claim about abstraction being that the person was still trapped on the inside of the creature, but I also think this one might have just been outright confirmed earlier on. I couldn't find the post about it, but I'm pretty sure it might have been confirmed. However, I think this whole piece about abstraction, especially after the finale, and talking to Jax just really is a slippery slope as a whole that I'm not too comfortable with making any confirmation on. Yes, I was right in the sense that she was able to connect with Jax, who was still inside the madness, but we don't know if this was like a one-time thing, and we also have the scene with the abstraction monsters, who appear to have an aquatic form despite it already being that abstract monsters all largely retain and keep the same whole quadrupedal appearance indefinitely. I definitely think that there is something to theorize on here. Not sure whether or not I will make one on it though. We also have another big contention in my claims being the ultimate ending of CNA, since we never learned whether or not the company actually disbanded or they're still out there, and this was a key plot point that I definitely wanted an answer for. As from what I've seen and the consistency of my abandoned buildings claim, I have reason to believe that still CNA is either finished or at least massively downsized, but they may very well still be out there, and Kinger might even still work there after Mike Dobby or Scratch's death. It's especially suspicious as Cain was able to briefly connect to the internet in the series finale despite the program supposedly being in an abandoned building. We can't even confirm what the digital circus was truly meant to be, as it was both a team of programmers working on heavily advanced AI, as Kinger stated, but that there was also Scratch or Mike Dobby, who had a brain tumor and may have been trying to create it as a form of digital immortality. We can assume and say probably a bit of both, but we just can't confirm, as we don't know the fate of CNA. But overall, those were the other plot points that I largely couldn't find solid evidence for or against, and it all kind of orbited around the Cain and Abel company and how the digital circus truly worked. Thus, I want to move on with what I actually thought about the finale. My thoughts on the finale kind of coincide with me just wanting more of an answer for things in the end, and I don't think I got that. I understood that whatever the answers were, that I wasn't going to get all of them, but I feel like more than a few key plot points were largely left unanswered, as well as almost rapid fire of things in the finale, being Cain randomly coming back to life, randomly connecting to the internet, having that amount of brain scan data in Cain's hands, despite not being the confirmed number of people in the circus, the abstraction monsters having new forms and faculties, Cain seemingly having this vitriol for Kinger at points, and a few other things. That being said, there was also a lot that I liked about the finale. For one, the characters all ended up finding contentment in their situation, which I really liked, and it even made me feel vindicated one last time in bringing Soma into this so wholeheartedly. That final scene in Soma where Saiyaman is at the terminal, and it asked him if this new life has meaning, and he answers, maybe we can find a new meaning here. That's what every character ended up choosing, and since Kane was able to connect to the internet, even if briefly, it might not be a one-time occurrence, and these characters do in fact have a future even separate from their human counterparts.
The point is, you can't get so hung up on where you'd rather be that you forget how to make the most of where you are.
Like, this is unironically the good ending. It's a bittersweet ending, but it's alive. There's another thing too that I really liked, being the redemption arc and then outright inclusion of Kane into the group. Kane does sort of randomly change his tone, but at the same time he also takes the opportunity to learn more about humans and what they are in contrast to him. He goes back, apologizes, and does his best to make things right, and behave more with what he now understands they actually need. And because of this, the crew forgives him and even welcomes him to a seat at the table, seeing him as one of the humans. And there's a strange beauty to this and the crew treating Kane just like another human that I absolutely love. To vocalize it, I'll reference the book All Tomorrows. It's a story about how humans who started colonizing space were attacked by a race of cult-like aliens who violently devolved and mutated any sentient life they came across into various other forms, like making humans into worms or winged creatures or carnivores and herbivores of each other. Eventually, some of these races over thousands of years became sentient again, but some weren't so lucky, like the lizard herders, who predictably on their world herded lizards. When they were devolved by the aliens, the people there never regained their sentience. However, their pet lizards eventually did evolve into sapients, and because human architecture was all around them to work with, the lizards, then referred to as Saurosapiens, adopted a lot of the technology, customs, and eventually the entire cultural identity of humans, and when the other post-mutation human races met them, they saw the Saurosapiens as just as human as they were. All of them were then murdered by a bunch of giant circles, but it goes to say that when it comes to being human, it means a whole lot more than just per se looking the type or holding specific DNA patterns. It's the life you live. Ultimately, I think the series finale of Digital Circus is just okay. I don't think it was bad, but I couldn't help but feel like I wanted more in regards to answers to everything, and it just felt like we still had a few loose ends flapping about. But hey, I just might make another theory on it. Personally, I think in regards to the abstraction monsters, that with all that has been displayed in the finale, that there would be a way to maybe not reverse abstraction per se, but change from abstraction into something new, reincarnation style maybe. Since Kane 1 can easily cure jumbling, the thing that glitches out characters when attacked by abstraction monsters, and 2, that Kane has access to mind files. However, I think Kane probably also has somewhat of a code of ethics, and likely wouldn't make a clone of another character, as it could easily cause a situation like one of the ones we see in Soma.
There must be something wrong. Can't you run a diagnosis or something? Catherine?
What was that?
No, it's just...
Why was it still talking?
It's the same like before.
Catherine, why was he still talking?
That's how it works, you know that.
What do you mean?
You know it's not magic. You were copied. The sleeping Simon in the seat was copied, and now you are here, just like Simon lived on in Toronto.
God damn you, Kath. 2 Simons? There can't be 2 Simons!
We also still don't even know why Kane was running it like a show or who the committee are, and maybe these questions can be answered with a theory, or maybe they will just stay as mysteries. Small suspicions that made this realistic fiction world all the more mysterious.